face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise.
The person that I chose to do for Black History Month is Dr. Dana O. Baldwin. The reason I chose Dr. Dana O. Baldwin is because he is my grandfather's father, and he has done a lot for the Black community around Martinsville and Henry County. Dr. Baldwin is from North Carolina, and he came to Virginia after his stay in the military. For many years, Dr. Baldwin was the only Black physician around Martinsville and Henry County. Among his accomplishments was the start of a hospital named St. Mary's, which was named after his mother. Being a doctor was not only his only accomplishment, he was also an entrepreneur and was instrumental in many Black-owned businesses along Fed Street. These businesses became known as the Baldwin Block and was the heart of the Black community. The Baldwin Block is now where the New College Institute sits. These businesses that Dr. Baldwin was instrumental in starting included bowling alleys, an ice cream parlor, a restaurant, a dental practice, a pharmacy, and a theater and a hotel. Dr. Baldwin played a major part in starting up the German Ball, which was a social event and dance that featured a lot of famous entertainers such as Duke Ellington, Cab Calloway, Count Basie, Sam Cooke, and James Brown, just to name a few. The Dr. Dana O. Baldwin Memorial Park was established on Swansea Street in Martinsville, Virginia, to honor his legacy.
Have you ever heard of the Super Soaker water gun? What about played with one of these? Well, I want to talk to you today about their engineer and developer, Lonnie Johnson. Mr. Johnson was born in 1949 in Mobile, Alabama. He grew up in that area and went to Williamson High School during segregation. And in 1968, in high school, he entered into a robotics competition at the University of Alabama. Mr. Johnson was the only Black man that was in the competition, but guess what? He won. And from there, he went on to Tuskegee University and earned 2 degrees. He then entered into the Air Force and worked for NASA. And while working for NASA, he worked on several space programs, lunar odysseys, and during one of those times, he was working on a heat pump system and was trying to figure out a way to not use Freon, but to use water. And lo and behold, while doing so, invented the Super Soaker. Now, in 1989, I think it came out and was a huge hit. If you were growing up in the 90s, you played with or had brothers that had the Super Soaker. It was an awesome invention. You could hit people 10 to 20 feet away. But as if that wasn't enough, in 1996, Mr. Johnson came up with the trajectory and the shooting mechanisms for Nerf guns, and basically became the father and the owner of all things guns that were toys in the 90s. And Mr. Johnson has made millions of dollars, and the amazing things about him is that he used that money to found a research foundation and continues to do research to, even though have fun, improve our society and improve our way of living. Some of the things that he works on or has worked on is the Johnson thermoelectric energy converter. That is a mouthful. But it's an engine that turns heat into electricity. He's also working on a way still today to turn heat and other things into electricity for things for like cell phone batteries and things like that. So amazing man, still inventing, still hedging the way for others. You can have fun and contribute to science all along the way. We commend you, Mr. Johnson, for all that you've done and look forward to all the innovations that you have coming.
During Black History Month, we'd like to celebrate the life stories of some true trailblazers in the world of computer science. These men and women played an integral role in the development of the modern computer technology the world relies on today. You've heard of some well-known figures such as Katherine Johnson, who was the star of the movie Hidden Figures. But you'll also find the behind-the-scenes godfather of Silicon Valley, key players in the many computer hardware and software breakthroughs, and the founder of Black Girls Code, all contributors to the tradition of Black excellence in computer science. Starting with Roy L. Clay Sr. Born in 1930, he was a computer programmer, and in 1958, he started working as a computer programmer at Lawrence Radiation Laboratory in California. He was recruited in 1965 to set up Hewlett-Packard's computer development business and led HP's first foray into the computer market with the 2116A computer. He was inducted into the Silicon Valley Engineering Council's Hall of Fame in 2003. Clarence Skip Ellis, a computer scientist born in 1943. He was the first African American to earn a PhD in computer science. He contributed to the development of the ILLIAC 4 supercomputer, icon-based GUI, object-oriented programming language, groupware technology, and operational transformation. He was the first African American named to the Association of Computing Machinery. Mark Dean, born in 1957, a computer scientist who was the co-creator of the IBM personal computer that was released in 1981. He contributed to the development of the color PC monitor, the first gigahertz chip, and the industry standard architecture, or ISA system bus. He's the first African American to become an IBM Fellow, which represents the highest level of technical excellence. John Henry Thompson, computer scientist inventor born in 1959. He invented Lingo, a scripting language that renders visuals in computer software. As a chief scientist at Macromedia, Thompson developed Macromedia Director, a multimedia application authoring platform. His work was instrumental in bridging the early gap between art and technology and the foundation for the modern video games that you play, web design, animation, and graphics. And last but certainly not least, Miss Kimberly Bryant, founder of Black Girls Code. Born in 1967, Kimberly founded Black Girls Code in 2011, a nonprofit organization that teaches programming to young girls of color. Named by Business Insider as one of the 25 most influential African Americans in technology. She was honored by the White House in 2013 as a champion of change for tech inclusion.
Hi, I'm Bill Parks, the health and PE teacher at the Center for Community Learning. In honor of Black History Month, I'd like to talk about some black athletes who have profound impacts on the sports in which they played. They were trailblazers in a lot of different ways, dealing with adversity, racism, among other things. Yet they still persevered and played the sports in which they loved and allowed for a lot of future athletes to have a lot of opportunities along the way. Professional Golfers Association. Before you had Tiger Woods, this gentleman laid the way and foundation for him. Charlie Sifford was the first black golfer in the PGA. That occurred back in 1961. He was the first black American player to earn a PGA Tour card. He ended up winning the 1967 Greater Hartford Open Invitational and the 1969 Los Angeles Open. As far as tennis is concerned, before you had Serena, Venus, all the ones that you're familiar with nowadays, you had these people. Bob Ryland broke the barrier for black men as far as male tennis professionalism is concerned back in 1959. Althea Gibson in 1956 became the first black American to win a Grand Slam title, at that time known as the French Championship. The following year, she won both the Wimbledon and the U.S. Nationals, which is what the U.S. Open used to be known as, and then won both again in 1958. Arthur Ashe won 3 singles Grand Slam titles. He won the 1968 U.S. Open as an amateur. He forfeited the professional prize to maintain his amateur status. He also, as a professional, won the Australian Open in 1970, and he won Wimbledon in 1975. As far as boxing is concerned, before you had Mike Tyson, Muhammad Ali, Joe Frazier, George Foreman, Joe Louis, you had this gentleman that set the precedent, Jack Johnson. Back in 1910, Johnson's matchup with undefeated white opponent James J. Jeffries was coined the fight of the century. After Johnson knocked out Jeffries in the 15th round, race riots exploded all over the country. As far as track and field is concerned, some of the better athletes that you'll find were in the era a while back. Wilma Rudolph. Despite being diagnosed with polio as a child, Wilma Rudolph would grow up to become the fastest woman in the world of her generation. Competing in the 1956 Olympics in Australia, she would take home a bronze in the 4x100 meter relay. But in the 1960 Olympics in Rome, she sprinted her way into history by winning 3 gold medals, become the first American woman to accomplish such a feat at a single Olympics. Jesse Owens. Back in 1935, Owens was a student at Ohio State University. He attended the Big Ten Collegiate Track Conference in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and set a stunning 5 world records and equaled another in both sprints and long jump, and he also did that all within 45 minutes. He's most known for his 1936 Summer Olympic performance in Berlin, Germany, in which he won 4 gold medals. In gymnastics, really wasn't a trendsetter, but however, this young lady became the first black gymnast to win an individual all-around. In 2012, Gabby Douglas made history at the London Olympics when she became the first person to become the individual all-around champion. She also became the first American gymnast to win gold in both the gymnastics individual all-around and team competitions at the same Olympic Games. 4 years later, Douglas competed at the 2016 Olympics in Rio de Janeiro and helped her team, also known as the Final Five, win another gold medal for their team event.
Celebrate Black History Month, I want to focus on the African-American quarterback. And throughout history, the African-American quarterback has had to earn his way to that role for many different reasons. You know, early on, you had guys like Marlon Briscoe, Joe Gilliam, Willie Thrower, and George Taliaferro, who oftentimes were benched or were not given the opportunity to play quarterback. They were told they'd have to play defensive back or running back or wide receiver, although they had the skills and had proven they had the skills to play quarterback. But sometimes it was a fear that the Southern white football player would intentionally try to hurt them or maybe not block for them because they didn't want them to succeed. At other times in history, the mindset was that African Americans, didn't have the physical ability to play quarterback, but those myths were dispelled. And then it was myths that, they didn't have the mental capacity to play quarterback. But as more and more African Americans were given a chance, those myths were dispelled as well. And you had guys like Warren Moon, Michael Vick, Randall Cunningham, Donovan McNabb, Doug Williams, who was the first African-American quarterback to win a Super Bowl. Those guys proved that they could not only play quarterback, but could be successful and, be potential Hall of Fame athletes. And in today's time, you have guys like Deshaun Watson, Russell Wilson, who's another Super Bowl winning African-American quarterback, Lamar Jackson, Dak Prescott, Patrick Mahomes, who not only has won one Super Bowl, but is prepared to play for another Super Bowl. So these guys have proven that the African American can play quarterback. And in relation to Black history, it's important to realize that when these guys were given a chance, they were graded and scored on the same level as their white counterparts. They proved that they could play the position. In fact, they could excel because many of these guys lead the league in passing or the first quarterback to do this or to do that. And when African Americans are given the chance to play quarterback, be an administrator, be a supervisor, be a CEO, be a vice president, be a senator, whatever the case may be, they have proven that we can do the job just as well as anyone else. So let us remember the Black quarterback and how, when given a chance, they have stepped up to the plate. And if we open the doors and make it equal and for everybody, this could happen across the board in all aspects of life.
For Black History Month, I chose Charles Richard Drew, who is a scientist and pioneer in the medical field, for his research and development in the use and preservation of blood plasma, especially during World War II. Some of his procedures and techniques are actually still used by the Red Cross today. In 1933, he received his MD and his CM, but during his doctorate degree in 1938, he had to overcome some racial hurdles. He was assigned to study under John Scudder, who was granted funding to set up an experimental blood bank. But the intention was to keep Drew from privileges afforded his white peers, such as outpatient clinics, experience in outpatient clinics and operating rooms and surgical wards, but also preventing him from direct access from patients. He was actually eventually the first African American to earn a medical doctorate from Columbia University. He was then appointed to head the Blood for Britain project, which was an effort to transport needed blood and plasma to Great Britain, which was under attack during World War II by Germany. When the program ended in January 1941, they had actually collected over 14,000 blood donations and shipped over 5,000 liters of plasma to England. He created the Bloodmobile, which was a mobile blood donation truck with refrigeration, so he is known as the father of the blood bank. Ironically, the Red Cross excluded African Americans from donating blood. This policy was later modified, but it was still, however, it still upheld racial segregation of the blood. So only African Americans could receive African American blood, only whites could receive white blood. But obviously today that's not the case. The last 9 years of his life, he taught young African American surgeons so that they could be placed in strategic positions throughout the country, where they could in turn teach other African American surgeons about his work and making them the best surgeons that they could be. Which really today, some of the top surgeons are actually African American. If you look at Ben Carson, he is a neurosurgeon. He's known for being the first person to separate conjoined twins that were actually connected at the back of the head. He was also known for the successful neurosurgical procedure on a fetus that was still inside the womb. So Charles Richard Drew was able to, because of his racial hurdles that he had to overcome, he was able to open up the world for other African Americans to become great surgeons. Unfortunately, in 1950, he was in a car wreck, and when given a blood transfusion, he succumbed to his injuries and died. But because of his interest in biology, he went into the medical field, and he became the first African American to earn his doctorate from Columbia University. He created these techniques and these procedures and whatnot for us to be able to collect and store blood, so that now during emergencies and whatnot, we can save lives through blood transfusions, and we can collect blood and store it for longer periods of time for when it is needed. So that is my presentation on Black History Month for scientists. There are plenty of other African Americans that are in the science industry and medical professions and whatnot that you can look up. They are very interesting. You have inventors, you have astronauts that were, pioneers in, being the first African Americans to, be, go into space and everything. You've got Neil deGrasse Tyson, who is an extraordinary man who knows his stuff about astrology, and other, physics, science stuff. So yeah, look up some African Americans in the science field and learn some stuff.
Hello, everyone. This is Mr. Milner. And for Black History Month, I want to highlight Virginia Randolph. Virginia Randolph was born on June the 8th, 1874 in Richmond, Virginia. She began teaching at the age of 16 at the Mountain Road School in Henrico County. With her, she became known synonymously with vocational training. She taught her students such skills as woodworking, how to sew, how to cook, as well as various academic areas. Her teaching style centered around having parental support. She was known as being creative, and she took a common sense approach to education. Also, Miss Randolph was named the first Gene Supervisor Industrial Teacher. Within that position, she oversaw 23 schools in Henrico County. She also was responsible for training rural Black teachers, and she worked towards improving the curriculum at each of those schools. In 1915, the Virginia Randolph Training School opened up, and over time, it began to expand to include dormitories. Now, that school is known as the Virginia Randolph Education Center. In Henrico County, there are currently 2 schools named after her. Of course, we have the Virginia Randolph Education Center, which is a program for students who have disabilities, and it provides services and assists them with academic areas as well as behavior areas. Secondly, there is the Academy of Virginia Randolph. In conclusion, Ms. Randolph, she passed on March 16th, 1958 at the age of 87 years old.
Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka was a landmark in 1954 Supreme Court case in which the justice ruled unanimously that racial segregation of children in public schools was unconstitutional. Brown versus the Board of Education was one of the cornerstones of the civil rights movement, and it helped establish the precedent that separated but equal education and other services were not, in fact, equal at all. Please sit back and enjoy this clip.
Separate but equal. For more than half a century, these 3 words plagued America. The doctrine, separate but equal, provided the legal basis for racial segregation in the United States from 1896 until 1954. when the Supreme Court handed down the landmark decision Brown versus Board of Education. The justices declared that segregation by law violates the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. Passed just after the Civil War, the 14th Amendment guaranteed rights to all citizens regardless of color. The case, Brown versus Board of Education, was named for Oliver Brown, whose daughter was barred from attending the all-white school in their Topeka, Kansas neighborhood. In 1951, the NAACP filed a class action lawsuit on behalf of Brown and others. The following year, the Supreme Court agreed to hear that case and 4 others challenging racial segregation in schools. Collectively, the 5 were heard under the single name Brown versus Board of Education. Among those arguing for the plaintiffs was Thurgood Marshall, who would later be the first African American named to the Supreme Court. On May 17, 1954, Thurgood Marshall and his legal team scored an historic victory in the struggle for civil rights. On that day, Chief Justice Earl Warren announced the court's unanimous decision. Separate was inherently unequal and was therefore unconstitutional. The landmark ruling was met with resistance and anger across the South, and integration was slow in coming. But Brown versus Board of Education broke the back of segregation and helped spark the civil rights movement.
Okay, for Black History Month, I've chosen a guy by the name of Bass Reeves. I've showed his video for several Black History Months throughout the last few years during Black History Month, and but I never really looked into it other than just brain pop. And as I got to studying this guy is really a remarkable guy. He was born a slave, and he ended up running away up into the Indian country, Indian territories, to escape his master. And then sometime later, the 13th Amendment abolished slavery, and so he was free. But he went on to do some quite remarkable things. He must have been like a Superman in a way, because he was good at fighting. He was really good with a gun, and he was ambidextrous, so he could shoot with both of his hands. He was equally good with both hands, and he did the cross style of drawing, and so he was 6'2", which for back then was actually taller than it is now. So he's a big guy. He arrested 3,000 felons and brought them in, and he ended up shooting some of them, killing them when he had to, but he never got shot. He was never wounded by a gun. He would employ schemes with how to arrest people. He'd dress up and like somebody who was a poor hobo or something, and get into the house so he could arrest them. Or even one time he even dressed up, I think maybe like a woman, but he would use disguises. He would use all kind of methods. And back then you had to be really good at finding the outlaws. And so he was really good at that. He couldn't read or write, but whenever somebody would describe an arrest warrant to him, he would never arrest the wrong guy. He always got the right guy. He was very honest, had a lot of integrity. He had 10 children, and he worked up until 69 years old as a United States deputy. And then when he ended that, he did a while as a policeman for Muskogee Police Department. And so with all the things that he did, he's really an interesting character, and it's a big deal because they built a monument for him out in Fort Smith, Arkansas, and they have these things where they have everybody come and participate, and so the more I read, the more you'll find. There's a lot of information out there on him. They got some videos that people have made, and so for my guy, the one I chose would be Bass Reeves, United States Deputy Marshal of the United States.
To be raised in Oakland, California, to graduate from Howard University and the University of California Hastings College of the Law, becoming the 27th District Attorney of San Francisco, the 32nd Attorney General of California, and a U.S. Senator from California, and now to be able to stand on the platform of the Capitol of the United States and be sworn in as the first Asian African American woman Vice President of the United States of America. Kamala D. Harris has made history and has set the standard of what is possible for any woman of color. She is a woman who is unapologetically stands her ground on what she believes. The unbelievable feeling of the accomplishment she felt on January 20th of 2021 as she said these words. I, Kamala DeVi Harris, do solemnly swear that I support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that I take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office of which I am about to enter. So help me God. For this moment in history makes me beyond proud to be an African American woman saying, my vice president looks like me.